So we're continuing our series on high availability and disaster recovery. And what we're going to drill into a little bit is zone versus region redundancy. So let's say you've got the world of Azure, other cloud providers, the same thing applies. But you've got different regions, so that is a different geographical location. So those are, in Azure we call them regions, and then within a region you've got one or more data centers. So for example, in UK South, they've got 3 availability zones, 3 data centers. And then in UK West, they actually only have 1. Now, when you've got multiple computers with your data on, that's called locally redundant storage. It means that your data is written to more than one computer in the same data center. And that's the cheapest option, and pretty much that's available everywhere. But if you want to make sure that your data is written to multiple computers across multiple regions, that's zone redundant storage. So that allows you to make sure that if one of these data centers is wiped out, let's say someone cuts through the fiber optic cables or something like that, you're okay because you've still got 2 other data centers to process that. And then globally redundant is where that gets replicated to another region. And each of these get more expensive as you go through. Now, one of the things about globally redundant storage is that replication is always, or almost always, asynchronous. In other words, if this went down, there is a possibility that data hasn't actually been written to the other place yet. So that's something to bear in mind. And there's only certain cases where you can actually make sure that it is synchronous. Now, if you've got all your things in another region as well, you've got options there as well. You could have a cold standby. In other words, you've got DevOps scripts that can just spin up your application in another region. You don't get charged for them when you're not using it. It's just, you can just bring that up, but it takes some time, maybe a few minutes, maybe a couple of hours to bring up your application in another region. But that's the cheaper option because you've got to write the DevOps scripts and all that sort of thing, but you're not paying for any resources in the other region. You could have a warm standby, which is where everything's there, but it's not being used, but all you have to do is flip a switch and everything's there. Or it could be a hot standby. In other words, it's already processing data. It's got, maybe you're processing across both regions simultaneously and they're working all the time and you're load balancing between regions, and that's hot. Now that's the most expensive, but it means that you don't lose a beat when you're actually wanting to flip over. So a few options there. But some things to bear in mind, given the fact that particularly different regions have different numbers of data centers. So zone redundant storage or zone redundant services are not always available because some regions only have 1 availability zone. But also not all services are available in all regions. So if you're running something here and you might want to fail over to a different region, but that bit of Azure might not be supported. So you need to check that. Now if you just lose some servers or someone cuts a cable, zone redundancy is usually all right. So for most applications, and apart from the most heavily loaded and the most valuable, making it zone redundant, so running in one Azure region but across multiple data centers, that's usually okay. But there are times when for your really critical workloads, you might want to make sure that you can fail across another region. And why is that? Well, one reason is that actually Azure do their upgrades region by region. So let's say you've got a service, let's say it's app service that we run Logic Apps on, and that goes through an upgrade and it breaks all your code. Well, that's going to be across the whole region, potentially. So you need to run in a region that hasn't actually been upgraded yet. So there are things like that that make sure that your most critical workloads, that you understand what you need to do to make sure they're available when you need them. And that can be, I need to run those in a different region. Just some thoughts on high availability, more to follow.